Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Juggernaut, and I want to talk to you about books and literature, because that's what the cool kids are doing. Well, not really, but here's the thing. Occasionally, like once a month or maybe even less often, I do a video that's roughly based on literature. Something I read, something I wrote, whatever. For those of you that are newer to the channel and don't know, on my day job, my actual 9 to 5, as it were, quote unquote. Even though I don't actually, work in an office 9 to 5, but my full-time job, let's say, is actually as a researcher for university here in my country. And so, as a part of that, I get to do a whole bunch of reading, and I get paid for it, basically. I do research, I write papers, and they are pretty much all of them exclusively on the topic of, literature. Throw in a little bit of philosophy in there, a little bit of literary theory, criticism, etc., and more often than not, they touch on some social topics of politics and stuff like that, but in a more sort of broader philosophical sense. That's what I do, and then that's what I write about, and I'm doing my PhD thesis now, and so on and so forth. So yeah. That's my life and job outside of YouTube, but I sort of let it bleed a little bit into YouTube when I, discover something interesting that's, let's say, for the wider audience. And, today I thought that because it's been a long while since I did a video, I thought, why not recapitulate the past 3 years or so? Officially I've been employed for about 2 years now. Actually less than, I think. It's this May or April, it's going to be about 2 full years, but let's say I want to compress the past 3 or 4 years of reading and research that I've done, both as part of my job and previous, and prior to that. I want to condense it down into one video and talk to you about some of the favourite things that I've read, some of my favourite authors and some of my favourite works specifically. And so here's the video, I suppose, right? I'm going to find something to put as background footage. I'm not really sure what right now, but for now I'm just looking at an empty desktop. However, I do have a few things prepared that I'm going to read for you. And I really, really like especially the first one, I think, from... how do I put this? Just from a pure linguistic standpoint, the way the words sound, how melodic it is, and it is none other than Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm going to start off with him. You're going to notice probably a theme about some of these works and authors that I'm going to talk about. Most of it is fantasy or science fiction. Most of it sort of falls under a particular, maybe not genre. I despise the word, and there's all sorts of problems with it, but never mind. That we're going to leave that literary theory part out of the video. But it falls under a particular sort of type of stuff that I really enjoy, and I think it sort of really fits the channel as well. We're going to have authors like Lovecraft and some sci-fi stuff, and obviously Warhammer and so on and so forth. But I'm going to talk to you about some of the best things I've read, and at least in terms of just pure enjoyment and escapism, right? That in that sense. So I will steer clear, at least for the most part, of some of the heavier topics, because I read a few interesting books and articles and stuff that aren't exactly fun. They're very depressing. I mean, take anything by Foucault, and, well, I bet you that if you really get deeply into it, by the end of your research, you're going to be like, I should have never have picked this up, and now that I have, I sort of want to unalive myself in a very literal sense, because, you can't really disagree with the vast majority of the things that he says if you really get into it, and if you accept it as true, it's really depressing. So there are obviously antidotes, quote unquote, and alternatives to it. Speaking of, I'm looking into one of them right now, but I don't want to go into that direction. What I'm talking about is the stuff that I enjoyed the most, right? The fun works of art, entertaining, creepy, but ultimately, enjoyable from a escapism sort of standpoint, where I just really, really like what I read. And it's a cool story, it's an interesting narrative, and all those things. So, first and foremost is actually a really, really short little story, I guess. Yeah, it's a short story, basically. Although it sort of trods the line between poem and story very elegantly, let's say. It's by Edgar Allan Poe, and he has tons and tons and tons of his famous books and poems and everything. This one, not so famous, which is why I want to read a little bit of it to you and show you. So the short story, again, like I said, sort of in between the two, is Silence, a Fable by Edgar Allan Poe. It was published in 1838, and I read this exactly 4 years ago, and this is sort of the starting off point from where I'm taking sort of the last, let's say, 4 years of experience into account. So exactly 4 years ago, I read this for the first time. I read The Raven about, well, I don't know, like 10 years ago, maybe something like that, but this I only came across recently. And so I'm just going to read you a little bit of it. This is from the start. This is how the poem, this is how the short story / poem starts. "Listen to me," said the demon, as he placed his hand upon my head. "There is a spot upon this accursed earth which thou hast never yet beheld, and if by any chance thou hast beheld it, it must have been in one of those vigorous dreams which come like the simoon upon the brain of the sleeper who hath lain down to sleep among the forbidden sunbeams. Among the sunbeams, I say, which slide from off the solemn columns of the melancholy temples in the wilderness. The region of which I speak is a dreary region in Libya by the borders of the river Zaire, and there is no quiet there, nor silence." I get chills every time I read that. That is fucking awesome, is that not? I mean, I apologise for the swear word, but that is, pardon my French as they say, but that is effing awesome, is it not? So here's the thing with Poe. You really get the most out of it if you read it out loud. And the reason is he pays so much attention to how words sound, right? So I'll give you an example. The region of which I speak of is a dreary region in Libya. He puts region twice very, very much on purpose. By the borders of the river Zaire. He could have said the River Congo. He could have said the River Nile. It doesn't sound right? It doesn't sound quite as it doesn't produce the cognitive effect that something beginning with a Z does, right? Or a Z, whichever you prefer. So this is I think one of the things where Poe is just an absolute master, and you have it in The Raven. You have it in so many of his poems. Not always, though, but for many of them you do, and we actually have insight into how he wrote some of this stuff. He said that, first and foremost, you need to be aware of the beginning and the end of your story or your poem, and then based on that, you sort of fill in everything in between and make everything into a connected whole. So make sure it has the same sort of tones, it sounds similar, that the mood, the atmosphere you create when you read it is sort of matching from one paragraph on to the next. And so he goes really in depth into creating his works, and it's never just a stream of consciousness, right? It's always meticulous work, changing words and changing phrases and stuff until they sound just right. I'll give you an example for Raven, which is his most famous poem and one of the most famous poems of all time. Originally wasn't a raven, it was a parrot. And then it was supposed to be a parrot, and then for a long while it was a parrot as he was writing, and then he realized, well, hold on, a parrot's kind of silly, isn't it? I mean, sure, I'm going for this dark and ominous vibe and whatever, and there's a parrot there, and it's a colourful bird, and it's kind of silly. Like, no, we got to change it with something. And then he learned that crows have some of the same abilities that parrots do. Yes, crows can speak, much like his raven speaks as well, and that's sort of the best part, that everything that raven said is biologically possible for a raven to say. Well, Juggernaut the Raven just said nevermore. Exactly, but he responded every single time, and it's very possible that they can actually do that. I don't know if it's like a particular species of ravens, or if it's all of them, I don't know, but I know it is actually possible. There's nothing supernatural about it, right? Which is kind of the most ghastly thing about the poem, that there's nothing supernatural in there, even though it seems like there is. And he repeats the River Zaire. He repeats actions of the man. He repeats the phrase actions of the man, so from a paragraph way down below. And I looked upwards, and there stood a man upon the summit of the rock, and I hid myself among the water lilies that I might discover the actions of the man. And then ... a bit later down the line, and I lay close within shelter of the lilies and observed the actions of the man. And the man trembled in solitude. But the night waned, and he sat upon the rock. Repetition, right? This is like just a couple of lines down below. He repeats actions of the man. Actually, it happens 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times that he repeats actions of the man in the same story, and it's a very short story. So it's how it sounds. It's the syllables. It's all of that. Yeah, it's fracking awesome. And not just his poetry and his stories, although you have tons of those, you actually have some other things that he wrote. Poe was one of the first people to begin writing detective stories and detective novels, and that sort of whole genre. He started the whole trend of gothic horror and gothic literature and stuff. Not precisely, right, if you're looking for a stereotypical gothic novel, you might not look at Poe necessarily first, but he's the one that started the whole thing, right? That's where it starts from. And, really, wherever you go, the cat, for example, the Black Cat, the Gold Bug, Silence Fable, which I already told about, the Telltale Heart, the Old Portrait, the Pit and the Pendulum, which is a little bit more personal, I think, for him. It sort of describes his feelings in life because of all the mental issues that he had, living in a constant state of anxiety and fear and panic and so on and so forth, which a lot of people don't know. Yes, he lived in a constant state of panic, anxiety, and everything in between, even while writing. It was just pretty much constant. It gives you more appreciation for the man, right? So Poe is absolutely fracking amazing. A classic by, any measure. But like I said, if you sort of go away from his most popular works and delve into something a little bit different, it's still amazing. It's not like one of those authors that have a couple of masterpieces and then the rest of his stuff is just really not that great and not that worthy of mention. No, Poe's pretty consistent. Just some of his things are more popular than others, but his style is pretty consistent and it's pretty impressive all throughout his entire opus. So Poe goes to, the first. This is by no means like the best, just the first one I thought of 4 years ago. So, right, let's get rid of that, and then let's move on to something I read just recently. Now, for all the other books, I actually have them physically with me, so I'm going to read from the physical copy. I'm not going to read off the internet, so I can't really do a word search or anything like that. But let's go with probably my favorite book that I've read in a long, long while, maybe for the entirety of those 4 years that I've sort of sectioned off for the video. And that's William Gibson's The Neuromancer, or just Neuromancer. So let me just pick it up really quickly. So, William Gibson's Neuromancer. If you've played Cyberpunk, and I've played it for the YouTube series when it was first released, and I stopped the series because the game was just unplayable at that point. But I also finished the game recently. So if you're a fan of Cyberpunk or the genre or the video game or anything along those lines, you have to read the book that started it, basically. And that is William Gibson. Now, it's a very layered book. It serves as both a sort of stereotypical dystopian warning against the future and so on and so forth, which can actually just be a vaccine, according to some people, to inoculate you to what is inevitably going to happen. It's not a warning against anything, it's just showing you the future and getting you used to it, according to some critics and so on and so forth, which is a fascinating topic in and of itself. But Gibson's Neuromancer is a very layered book, philosophically speaking. So you have the explicit level of the narration, which is the protagonist and his life in this chaotic and technology-dominated world, and his inability to form connections deep and meaningful relations with anyone around him, I would say. He has intercourse with someone in the book. I'm not going to spoil much if you haven't read it, even though it's a very old book and very it's a classic, right? Also, you got to remember it debuted, I think, in 1980 something. Let's see if it says here, 1984. Yeah, no, not 1984. The book, it's just happened to debut in 1984, right? Winner of the Hugo, Nebula, and Philip K. Dick Awards. Speaking of Philip K. Dick, we'll talk about that a little bit as well, but he's also on the list. Anyways, it's riveting action. It's very fast-paced. It's very interesting. You sort of just fly through the pages, and I've made it to about 200 pages in the book, and I haven't really noticed that I made it to 200 pages. I was like, oh no, this is ending. Like, this book is about to end. I don't want this story to end, right? It is a trilogy. Neuromancer is a trilogy. The other two books are Count Zero and... God, I don't know off the top of my head. I'm trying to find it here if it says anywhere. I know he wrote Count Zero, I know he wrote the Mona Lisa Overdrive, and I know he wrote Burning Chrome. And I think those four are like, including Neuromancer, they're kind of connected, but it's not a traditional sequel where it's just story goes from one to the other one, I think. Not in a more sort of contemporary sense, but anyways, regardless. Like I said, it's a very layered book philosophically. I'm actually planning to write a article on this, a scientific article on it, about exile in Neuromancer. Because exile in the Neuromancer is a huge topic. He is exiled from his own sort of physical world that he resides in, and then he's kind of exiled from the digital world. And then he seeks solace in the digital, and it's a whole topic. Like I said, it's its own separate thing, but sticking to the more sort of surface level of the narration, it's a fantastic book because the action is so well paced, yet a little bit of rest in between the high sort of the pursuit, the intense, the combat scenes, the intensity and stuff like that. You get a nice space of really well executed descriptions of the city, of society, and everything. And the characters are very, very well written as well. Do they verge on the stereotypical sometimes? Kind of, but you gotta remember this is 1984 and this is the beginning of cyberpunk as a genre. So they're kind of stereotypical because of everyone repeating sort of the same thing over and over again. Since Gibson, and of course there is the original author of Night City and Cyberpunk and all that stuff, right? But you read Gibson and you will realize that it's really kind of a rework of what Gibson was talking about. Even a lot of the terminology even repeats, but regardless, not to take away from the original creator of Cyberpunk, but still, like this is to me this is phenomenal. And it's one of the rare books where, like I said, sort of coming towards the end of it, I thought to myself, oh no, like this is ending. I don't want this to end. Because it's just like in Night City, right? If you think this has a happy ending, you weren't paying attention. And still, like, you hope for the best and you get really attached to all the, well, not to all the characters, but you really get attached to the protagonist and some of his close associates, let's say. And yeah, I read it while on vacation. I read the first 200 pages, and then I sort of left it aside for a little bit, wanted to ponder the book a little bit more, and I finished it later down the line, a couple of weeks later. It's an awesome piece of work. It really is. That sort of emotional attachment to the world that you get is very rare. It is. It is very, very rare. So, yeah. Necromancer, Gibson, awesome. Check him out. Right, where do we go from there? Sorry, I have to get up and find the next book. I think the next one I'm going to do is Arthur C. Clarke. Now, Actually, I'll pull this one out. It's in the back. Arthur C. Clarke is a science fiction writer and is one of the first science fiction, like strict science fiction authors in the contemporary sense of the genre. So there's a lot to choose from when it comes to Arthur C. Clarke. Let me just. I know one of the things that he wrote was, I think it was called The Ultimate Question. Or The Final Question. Something like that. Let me just check it. No, not The Final Odyssey. The Last... No, sorry, that was Asimov. Jesus, I am... Right. Give me a second. Okay, just wanted to prepare a few things. There's a reason I'm mixing up Clarke and Asimov, because I sort of wanted to mention them together in this segment. The particular book that I read recently was Childhood's End. And again, it's not his most popular work, probably, but it's a very interesting story about why it is necessary for humanity to constantly develop technologically. The TLDR of the book, and I'm not going to spoil much, is an alien race comes in and makes it so it's impossible for humans to develop scientifically, to improve their technology in any way, shape, or form. And it shows a sort of totalitarian control by that restriction and how much university, science, and progress is needed, not just from a technological sense of getting a better computer, getting a better, whatever, but from a cultural sense as well, how much that is impactful and how much that is important to the essence of being human, to the essence of humanity. And so, for that reason, I'm going to single that book out. But generally speaking, Clarke, Asimov, and Robert A. Heinlein are considered sort of the big three, quote unquote, for science fiction, and they're one of the first science fiction authors. Asimov's, for example, I think it's Asimov, the last question, right? It's not the final question, it's the last question. It is, I think, by many considered to be the greatest, if not one of the greatest, one of the greatest, if not the greatest science fiction short story of all time. And I kind of have to agree with it. Although I think it will resonate differently with different people based on their beliefs. And I don't just mean like religious beliefs, but generally how you view the world and the universe and stuff. It might resonate more or less with you. A couple of others, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Pretty much up there, right? If you wanna take a look at that as well, pretty much up there. It's an entirely different thing, unrelated, but yeah. The last question is just amazing, and it's a short story, so I'm not going to spoil a single bit of it, but it revolves around asking the sufficiently advanced computer the ultimate question, right? And the ultimate question about life, the universe, and everything. And the answer is not 42. No, the answer is serious. It just so happens that the computer starts calculating from the moment it was asked to infinity until it gets infinitely complex and infinitely smart. And it comes up with an answer at the very end of its life cycle. At the end, where humanity has transcended its physical form and have become beings of pure energy through technological advancement and biological advancement and then evolution and so on and so forth. So we're talking about a long, long, long time. The 9 Billion Names of God is also, that's R.C. Clarke, is also kind of similar. Well, not really similar, but it sort of tackles a similar kind of broad thing, and that's what I actually haven't read, so I'm going to read that in a couple of days now, and in the next few days I have some work to do before that, but yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's just, I can't tell you anything about it because I would spoil it, but the revelation at the end is just perfect. of what the answer is, and the leaps in narrative from one time frame to the next are really well executed as to not be confusing, right? So you can see a clear connection and a clear path from the beginning to the end, and it's not one of those situations where you keep having time jumps and you've completely lost the plot and you don't know who's related to who or what. No, they're very, very neatly ordered and executed, and you just keep jumping forward, which also helps. There's no going back. So on a structural level, it's really well laid out. It's clear, and it helps with you understanding the book, and it sort of opens itself towards you, or the story, not the book. It sort of opens itself towards you. It's great. And then obviously 2001 and 3001, A Space Odyssey and The Final Odyssey, respectively. There's also one in between, isn't there? There is 2061 Odyssey 3, there is 2010 Odyssey 2, and 2001 A Space Odyssey. I think I got them all off the top of my head. Let me just check if that's correct. A Space Odyssey, Odyssey 2, Odyssey 3, and The Final Odyssey. There we go, yeah. It's great. I think you really need to read it in order to be able to appreciate a lot of the science fiction authors later down the line, right? I would stick with some of the shorter stories, though, because it's a commitment to read these things. It's very, very long, and I think both Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke lack a little bit in their linguistic department of their style. That it could have been made a little bit more, how do I put this? A little bit more colorful, a little bit more bombastic, right? That when you go through their sentences, it's a particular style that is sort of quasi-scientific and all that, which is great for the genre and for what they're writing. But at the same time, I feel like it lacks a little bit of soul, lacks a little bit of Poe, like By the River Zaire. And I don't mean that it should be written as a poem. No, I mean something more like, Dan Abnett, for example, has that sort of style where it's very vivid he's very vivid in his descriptions. He has some other flaws with some stereotypes that he tends to use occasionally, and so on and so forth, and sort of predictable last-minute saves, and et cetera, but regardless, his descriptions are very vivid and he comes up with new words and stuff like that, which I already talked about in a previous video, so I won't focus too much on it. But yeah, it's like, because the books are very, very long, it's like 4 novels, right? It's a bit of a commitment. I think some of the shorter stories are really great to get you in on that action. And Childhood's End is also good because it's pretty short. So there you go. Right, let's move on. And I'm going to move on to a Chinese author, which I think recently has become very, very popular, but I read this book before the TV show came out, which is important because that way I'm just not latching on to the latest popular thing. It's a genuine interest I had. And the author is Cixin Liu, I think. I apologize if I've completely butchered the name. I think that's how you roughly how you're supposed to pronounce it. And it's The Dark Forest and that whole trilogy. Now, I've only read I haven't read the entirety of The Dark Forest, the first book. I read most of it. And then the TV show came out. And then I watched the TV show, and how can I put this? It took me a while to realize that we're talking about the same book and the same source material. Because it's very different. I think it's no secret that it took me a number of episodes to realize, wait, hold on, I read this book, or at least the book that this is based off of. What the hell are these people and what the hell is going on? The main overarching plot is the same, but most of the characters are different. And, Hollywood, and generally in America, they talk about whitewashing and race swapping characters and stuff like that, and that's a whole big controversy I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. But you want an example of the opposite happening? In the original, everyone's Chinese. I mean, the author's Chinese makes sense, right? Here, I struggled to find a single Asian person. They do appear eventually. It's just that it's that and the actual interactions between characters and the characters that appear, or rather the characters that don't appear but are supposed to appear, it's such a huge difference between the book and what's happening in the TV show that it took me ages to realize. There are so many more important characters that appear in the book, and it just makes sense. For example, the Secretary General of the UN, or, people in ridiculously high positions in office, the defense minister, the minister of this, minister of that, the president, the chairman, etc., etc. And there's no president, it's just the chairman. But yeah, like, people like that appear, and in the TV show, it's like a bunch of teenagers and kids and young adults with 9-to-5 office jobs that just happen to be there, and this sort of falls upon them. It's like, what? Like, where's the... Like, sure, that a lot of what happens in the show happens in the book, don't get me wrong, but, like, where's the other stuff? So my point is, if you want to read the book, do it. If you want to watch the TV show, don't expect it to be the same thing. It's very different. But it's good. It's good because of the premise. And I really, really like it, and I think it's a very unique premise, and I think it deserves a lot of attention, and it's sort of going to be permanently there, stuck in the back of my head, whenever a sci-fi discussion comes up. Because the premise is, just like in the TV show, you can like watch the trailer for it, you'll understand pretty much the basics of what you need to know. The long and short of it is, aliens are coming, and they don't like us, and they're probably going to wipe us all out. The good news is they haven't discovered faster than light travel, or faster than light travel isn't possible physically. It's one of the two. But they're moving slower than the speed of light. They're moving very quickly, but slower than the speed of light. So it's going to take them a long while to get here. We know they're coming, and now we have to prepare. So how do we prepare? Well, a lot of people prepare by unaliving themselves. Understandable, realistic. A lot of people prepare by just, we're going to party because they're not going to be here by our lifetime anyway, and we're going to leave that as a problem for the future generations to handle. The more sensible people are like, right, we're not going to fight them. We're not going to be able to do much to help the future generations fight them, but let's do our damnedest to give the future generations a head start. And that's what they do. And the aliens have a way of sabotaging that, or attempt to sabotage Earth's technological development, because they understand that how quickly humanity's evolving and advancing technologically, that by the time they get to Earth, the humans are just going to wipe the floor with them, with advanced weaponry and stuff like that, especially now that the humans know that they're coming, right? I mean, obviously more is going to be invested into orbital defenses and spaceships and so on and so forth. So, yeah, they need a way to stop Earth from technologically developing. Kind of like an Arthur C. Clarke's version, except there the aliens are already here and they're stopping development in a different way. But anywho, and a lot of the book is about the inner political workings and relationships that people have and their reactions to the crisis, to the point where the aliens become more or less important by the end, right? It's not really about the aliens. Sure, they're a major plot point, don't get me wrong, but the book's more about humanity itself and a sort of introspective view of different nations and nationalities and creeds and stuff coming together to work for a common goal, and the problems that they have and sometimes their inability to come together. And so it's really a science fiction book, but it's more about the human spirit and civilization as a whole, and how fragile it is, and how problematic it is. Because obviously all the wealthiest people in the world are banding together to make a spaceship to get out of here, leave everyone behind, and just go and live on a different planet. Leave this one to the aliens. safe solution, right? It's an immediate solution. It's a solution money can buy, very importantly, right? And so there you go. And then there's obviously people that are collaborating with the aliens, because, well, I mean, every war has its collaborationists, right? And then there you go. So it's really about that sort of inner politics and stuff. And it's a great book. It's a great book, and it's very China-centered, which makes sense given given where the author is from and given where our point of view is from, which also makes it unique because it doesn't really delve into a sort of political propaganda piece for the CCP or whatever. It presents a feasible, realistic scenario, and it's very real. It doesn't have a lot of subtle messaging to try and convince you anything. No, it just presents things as sort of they appear to be, in that sense. And I really like that. Like, there's no political pandering, basically, to any side of the political spectrum. It's just sort of centrist and sort of presenting everything as objectively as possible. Then right, yeah, there you go. That was science fiction. Now we're going to move on to something a little bit different. We're going to move on to horror stories, and we're going to go to I'm going to go to Lovecraft and the Lovecraft mythos. But before we do that, Warhammer, Dan Abnett, Graham McNeil, the Eisenhorn trilogy. I talked about it previously on the channel already, so I'm not going to go into it. But I think Dan Abnett's style and the way he writes is phenomenal, and I definitely recommend it. The one thing I read very, very recently from Warhammer, and I'm going to just open it up really quickly. I have it on my computer. Where is it? Here we go. That is the Gaunt's Ghosts, a Sabbat World Crusade collection. Now, I haven't read everything, but what I have read is the Sabbat War, and I've read Gaunt's Ghosts, and I've read Double Eagle. Double Eagle was awesome. Double Eagle was really, really awesome. It's about an air war over the Sabbat worlds. Interceptions, dogfights, bomber escort missions, etc., etc. Very uncommon for Warhammer 40k, which tends to focus on, the Space Marines, the Imperial Guard, ground combat, maybe the Inquisition and stuff like that, but this is a book purely dedicated to the pilots of the Imperium, and their whole war above the skies above the skies, in the skies, above all the other happenings on the ground. And it's even mentioned in the book. Generally speaking, you have the ground forces, the Marines, Marines, tanks, Imperial Guard, etc., etc., PDF forces, and then you have the Navy, which is spaceships, giant hulking destroyers, battleships, Armageddon class, etc., etc., massive fights like that in cosmos. But what goes unnoticed by the majority of the Imperium is in between. It's the atmosphere, because there's fighting there as well, and there's regular jets and planes and, stuff like that happening there as well. There's even massive, carriers that fly and stuff, obviously, so that goes often unmentioned and untalked about. And the book is there sort of to rectify that. I really, really, really liked it. So yeah, there you go. I recommend the entire collection. There's also a series of short stories, which I don't actually know where they are. I have them somewhere here, but it's by different authors, and it's all from different perspectives. So you have one about a heretic, one of the Chaos Forces. You have one about miners digging trenches underneath, digging underneath trenches, tunnelers, try and get explosives into position to blow up enemy fortifications from below the ground to enable their forces to actually assault the positions without, getting completely wiped out. And they're very short, and they're very personal, and they're very touching, and I think they're very, very well written, and they're very effective, especially given their sort of compact So definitely like that. Titanicus is a special piece of work, I want to say. It's you can assume what it's about from the title. Yes, it's about Titans, but yeah. It's awesome. It really, really is. That's it about those things. Let's move over to the Cthulhu mythos and a little bit about Lovecraft and a few similar authors. So, with Lovecraft, I'm going to start off with the man himself, right? H.P. Lovecraft. I have his complete works, the whole book. It's massive, and he's a great author, and he's also very popular, which is why I'm not going to talk about him much right now. I mean, we all know about Cthulhu, right? We all know about Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, and so on and so forth. If you don't, here's the thing. They don't actually feature as prominently as you might think. They're sort of hinted at, and they're always kept in the background of all of his stories, and then occasionally you get hints of, you know, one or the other here and there as the Ancient One, and so on and so forth. So if you want to learn about the actual creatures themselves, you're probably better off Googling them, because you get a collection of where they're mentioned or where they're all mentioned, and so on and so forth. But besides the point. Sorry about that. Cthulhu has the Cthulhu mythos in general has a very specific tone, very specific atmosphere, and is very prone to repetition of similar motifs and similar actions and similar situations, which is a bit of a problem if you're going to read a lot of it. Now, over the past few weeks, I've read about one horror story each night. More specifically, I listened to it. The majority of those that I've consumed, quote unquote, were through audiobooks, but it's the same thing, right? And the audiobooks are great, and I can specifically recommend one channel, which is Horror Babble. Horror Babble is an extremely active channel. They post, or he posts, pretty much every day, I think, more or less. In fact, if I go, I have his channel open here. If I go through it, I think he literally posts every single day a different type of video, either a long story or a short story or something. It's a great channel. You have all sorts of different Cthulhu mythos horror stories that not just Cthulhu, but mostly like H.P. Lovecraft inspired authors and stuff like that. Although you do have some Bram Stoker here as well and stuff like that. But sorry, I need to cough and clear my nose for a second. Okay, my apologies. I'm back. I'm not for a moment going to tell you that Lovecraft isn't a terrific author. Poe and Lovecraft sort of started this whole thing, and you really need to read them to appreciate the origins of the genre, and not just that, but they are just phenomenal authors. I like Poe a little bit more, but Lovecraft is great, don't get me wrong. Psychological horror, all that good stuff. Terrific. However, take in moderation, right? If you're going to read a story by H.P. Lovecraft, don't read another one of his stories or another one of his novels for a while. The reason is it tends to get a bit repetitive, and it gets a bit much, especially with a prolific author like that. I mean, you could say the same for virtually any author in the world, right? But if you read a bunch of Poe, it's still good, right? It's still awesome. You get a bit tired of it, but it's still really, really good. Whereas if you read a bunch of H.P. Lovecraft, it starts to bother you. You start to notice that it's really... It loses the effect. It becomes a bit nonsensical, and you start to sort of see through the horror, and it gets a little bit ridiculous. I'll explain why. You take, like, 3 of his stories, for example. I guarantee you, in all 3 of them, the protagonist is about to faint from horror at one point. Which, if you read just one, is, okay, this means that it's super scary and it's overwhelming him psychologically and stuff. If you read 3 or 4 or 5 of his stories, it becomes ridiculous, and it's like, what the hell are these people doing? They're all about to faint. And they all say, I dare not remember, and I'm trying to forget what happened. And yeah, it's a key part of the whole mythos and everything of just like cosmic horror completely overwhelming the human spirit. Don't get me wrong. I like that. It's fine. It just gets a bit much. They're all about to puke, they're all about to faint, and they're all overwhelmed, and it gets a bit funny, and you start to ridicule it a little bit internally when you read too much of it. So take with moderation. But what I do want to sort of draw attention to is other authors that have written within this sort of same universe. So yeah, it's not just Warhammer that has authors writing within the same universe and then like different, stories, chapters, characters, and stuff like that. No, the Cthulhu Mythos has that as well. And especially, I want to show you a very, very good author that I just have absolutely fallen in love with, and that is Alison V. Harding. There's a few other good ones. There is... let me see. Well, you know what? Actually, you can go like Ian Gordon, for example, or... let's see... Ian Gordon has a lot. Who else did I read that I really, really liked? I'm going through the list here. Clark Ashton Smith is good. Thomas Burke is also really good. Robert E. Howard, that's what I was looking for. Robert E. Howard. Yeah, like all phenomenal authors. But Harding is underrated. She wrote in the golden age of these short horror stories. Even some of the longer ones, but yeah, it's sort of in the golden age of the Cthulhu Mythos, where all the other mentioned authors, including H.P. Lovecraft himself, wrote. So she went sort of under the radar at that point, and her stories are really special because she's a lot more to the point, and her monsters are kind of different, generally speaking. Obviously, there's exceptions to this here and there, but her monsters are very unique and very different in that they know exactly what they are, they know exactly what they want to do, and they don't mess around. They're very precise and to the point, right? The Mole Man is probably one of my favorite stories that's really unsettling and sort of stays with you, especially because it features children a lot, and the children are the victims. It's not that kind of creepy, but children are the victims here. And sure, you can find some stereotypes in her story as well, but her monsters are a lot more terrifying because of how imposing they are and because of how unbothered they are by people trying to stop them because they know they cannot be stopped. And so for the most part, they just ignore them, which is very terrifying, and she presents it in such a terrifying way. But yeah, that's especially true in Mole Man, but in other of her stories as well. Yeah. So if you want to listen to any of that, the channel is called Horror Babble. That's Horror Babble. They also have their own website, which is horrorbabble.com. They have an Instagram, Facebook page. They have a Patreon page. Go check them out, or him out. I think it is one person. I just listened to like a dozen or so of the horror stories that are put on this channel. I don't actually follow the person producing them on any personal level. I never talked to him. I don't know him. But it's a relatively popular channel. It's around 200,000 subscribers and almost 1,000 videos. So you have almost 1,000 stories there of various lengths, or even collections of stories sometimes. Terrific channel, and the man has a golden voice for horror, and for psychological horror, and for all of that, like, absolutely golden. So I fully recommend him, and yeah. That's about it. Let me see if I have any other book. I probably have, like, a worthy mention somewhere. Yeah, I do. Worthy mention goes to Andrzej Sapkowski and The Witcher. Out of all the books that I previously mentioned, The Witcher I haven't really loved it that much. Oh, the Juggernaut hates The Witcher, and no. Here's the thing. It hasn't really stuck with me as much as Poe, Lovecraft, as much as Warhammer. I just love the setting, so it's not really fair to compare it. But as much as the other stuff that I've mentioned, it just hasn't really engraved itself into me as much. It's good. It's really good. I like how the narrative is presented and how uncertain it is. But I dare say that a lot of the Witcher books have been sort of spoiled, not in the sense of I know what's going to happen, but my enjoyment of them has been spoiled by the games, which have a very different atmosphere, and the way the characters act is also kind of different, and generally how Geralt acts is very different from how he would act in the books, and so there's always this sort of mental barrier between what I'm reading and what I've actually experienced in the games, which I've played first, like all three of them. And so there's this sort of weird sense of, I kind of prefer the games than this, which is kind of weird considering they're not really, like, the games are kind of a sequel to everything that happens in the Witcher books, right? So I understand why that things are different there, but at the same time, not quite, because some of the things that happened in the games happen in the books. So the timeline is a bit mixed, right? So some events, or at least very similar events, happen in the games that are supposed to happen in the books and have supposedly happened before the start of the first game. So, you know what I mean? Like, the whole chronology of it is so messed up that you're best to just read them separately. Completely ignore the games, completely ignore the books, and just look into both completely separately. But anyways, I like it. I get the feeling that I would like it a lot more if I read it in Polish. Unfortunately, I don't speak Polish. If the books were in Russian, I still don't think I will be able to read them, like if they were originally written in Russian, or because I mean, Russian's the only other Slavic language that I speak other than my own, Serbian. Well, I'm the whole Yugoslavia area, it's the same language, but linguistically speaking. But anyways, you can just call it different names, but I don't want to get into that right now. I feel like I would like it a lot more, and the reason I'm saying that is because I've seen some clips of The Witcher dubbed in Polish, and I've read some of the, in-game notes and stuff like that are written in Polish, and the wording is a lot more interesting. It sounds better, and the style is, I think, a lot more interesting, the way it's written. I have a good example of that, actually. I think Priscilla's song in Polish. Lyrics. There we go. I think it's one of those things where everyone can play it, and I don't have to actually read you an excerpt from the book and whatever, because this is I think it's ludicrously popular on YouTube, so you can just go and listen to Priscilla's song in English and listen to it in Polish. And if you actually understand the lyrics in Polish, it sounds better in Polish. It really does. Fiolkowe oczy mokre od łez is... I don't know how it's translated in English, but it's... eyes glistening as you weep, I think, is something along those lines. But mokre od łez is... I need to get into a linguistic analysis of why this sounds better, and why the word mokre, meaning wet, is a lot more picturesque and a lot more colourful and emotionally more impactful for the listener than just eyes glistening from tears, which is not how it's literally translated. I need to actually open up the lyrics in English. The Woven Storm. Of violet eyes glistening as you weep. There we go. So glistening as you weep. Let's do a very, very quick analysis linguistically of why it sounds better in Polish, and this sort of goes to Sapkowski and everything. Glistening, generally speaking, has a positive connotation. Eyes glistening as you weep, violet eyes glistening as you weep, right? What glistens? Shiny things, jewelry, right? That's your first mental association with glistening eyes. It's kind of positive. You go over to Polish. Where is it? Mokre od łez, meaning wet from tears, does not have a positive connotation like that. Something that is wet, generally you associate with not good feelings. You get wet in the rain, you can catch a cold, etc., etc. It's sort of engraved in the language, but aside from that, there's no connection to anything. Your eyes can glisten from feeling happy as well, right? They can't be mokre, they can't be wet from tears from your happiness. You don't use the same word, right? And so there's these layers of meaning and connotations that are present in Polish that get lost in translation often. And it's not so present within the game because, right, it's a question of how the game dialogue is written. Like, is it originally written in Polish and then translated, or is some of it written in English and then translated to Polish? Look, I understand the developers are Polish, and most of the writers and all that, but is it every single line of every single quest of every single dialogue? And then how important is it? Because a lot of that dialogue is, hi, I want to trade, and so on and so forth. And besides, it's a huge studio. It's it's different when you're translating an action scene, when you actually see their faces and you move around and there's events unfold in front of your eyes. You don't have to provide a description of anything. You just have to translate the dialogue. Whereas with a book, you need to translate every description and everything. So it's more can be lost in translation, right? Just there's more to translate. So as a result, I think I would like The Witcher more if I read it in original Polish. And I say the same thing, for example, the reason I mentioned Russian is I've read The Metro, and I read it in English, and I didn't like it very much. And then I read it in Serbian, or I read it like the Serbian translation of it, and it's much better because the languages are closer, less gets lost in translation. And then I read parts of it, because my Russian isn't that good to be able to actually read a novel, but I read parts of it in Russian, and I liked it a lot more in the sense of style and linguistics and stuff. So I get the feeling I would like this a lot more if I read it in the original language, but it just hasn't stuck with me as much as all the other books. But there you go, we went into a short little analysis there. I hope you appreciate it. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe interesting. I don't see a lot of people doing this on YouTube, so maybe you found it at least a little bit amusing. Right, that's about it. Thank you very, very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Those have been my favourite authors. I'm going to leave a list down in the description below so you don't have to watch the entire video and all my explanations for it if you just want a nice little short list of reading recommendations. And that's about it. What have you been reading recently? I do really want to start a conversation on this. You can let me know in the comments down below, or you can message me on Discord, whichever you prefer. We have a community Discord down below, by the way, if you want to join and talk there about it. We have a literature section there. And yeah, that's about it, I think. Thank you very much for watching. Like, subscribe down below if you enjoyed the video, and just to let you know, channel memberships are now a thing on the channel. So if you want to, support the channel directly, monetarily, it is an option. But by no means feel compelled to do anything. Just letting you know that they are now open. And yeah, that's about it. Until next time, have fun, take care, and bye-bye. Oh, and of course, if you have any questions about anything I just talked about, feel free to let me know down in the comments below, and I will answer each and every one. Bye-bye.